first thing I remember is the smell of antiseptic and something floral, probably from a get well bouquet someone had left on the windowsill. Then the light, too bright, pressing against my eyelids like it had something to prove. I tried to move my fingers and they responded, slow and clumsy, like they'd forgotten how. I was alive. I didn't know yet whether that was good news. My name is Ren Guellaway. I was 32 years old, a forensic accountant with a decent salary, a condo I was proud of, and a husband I thought I understood. I had a habit of color coding my spreadsheets and a tendency to overthink everything. My mother always said I was the kind of person who read the footnotes before the main document, which, as it turned out, made what happened to me even harder to explain. To other people, to myself. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The accident happened on a Tuesday in October. I remember it was a Tuesday because I'd had a quarterly review that morning and I was replaying it in my head on the drive home, mentally revising answers I'd already given, the way you do when it's too late to change anything. The sky had gone that particular shade of gray. That means rain is coming, but hasn't decided when. I was on Route 9, about 4 miles from our house, when a black SUV ran a red light at the intersection near the shopping plaza and hit me on the driver's side. I don't remember the impact. I remember before, and then I remember the smell of antiseptic. My mother told me later that I'd been unconscious for nearly 18 hours. She said she'd driven straight to the hospital the moment she got the call, that she hadn't even changed out of her gardening clothes. She was sitting beside me when I woke up, her hand wrapped around mine, her thumbnail pressing little half-moon dents into my palm, a nervous habit she's had since I was a child. When I opened my eyes and saw her, I started to cry. She started to cry. We stayed like that for a minute, just crying at each other, which sounds ridiculous, but felt like the most natural thing in the world. Then I tried to ask about my husband. My mother's face changed. It was subtle. A slight tightening around the eyes, the way her chin lifted just a fraction. I'd seen that expression before, usually when she was trying to decide how much of something to tell me. But before I could say his name, she squeezed my hand hard and gave me the smallest, most deliberate shake of her head. "Close your eyes," her expression said. "Don't let them know you're awake yet." I didn't understand, but I trusted her. I let my eyelids fall. 20 seconds later, the door opened. I heard his parents before I saw them. I knew their voices the way you know a sound that's always made you slightly uneasy, like a smoke detector with low battery. My mother-in-law spoke first. Her voice, that precise, controlled register she used when she was performing concern rather than feeling it. "Any change?" she asked. "The doctors said we should know more tomorrow." My mother's voice was carefully neutral. Footsteps. The soft drag of a chair. Then my father-in-law's voice, lower, directed away from me, toward his wife. I realized, as if he'd checked that I was still unconscious and dismissed me as a variable. "We need to move before she talks to anyone," he said. A pause. "The account in Phoenix, Conrad needs to know by Friday that the transfer is clean. If she starts asking questions when she wakes up, she won't." My mother-in-law's voice had gone flat. "David already has everything she signed. She doesn't even know what she signed." My pulse was doing something violent, and my mother's hand tightened around mine in one brief, fierce grip. She'd heard it too. We both held completely still. "And the car?" my father-in-law asked. Silence. "Rodrigo handled it," my mother-in-law said finally. "There's nothing to connect." They stayed another few minutes, saying nothing of substance, performing the gestures of concerned in-laws visiting their daughter-in-law in the hospital. When they left, my mother didn't say anything for a long time. Neither did I. We just sat there in the antiseptic-scented quiet while the rain finally decided to arrive and started tapping against the window. "How long have you suspected something?" she asked eventually. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe a while. I didn't want to look at it directly. She nodded. She understood that. She'd done it herself once with my father. Years ago. Looked away from the thing that would break everything if she looked at it head on. Okay, she said. So now we look at it directly. My husband's name is David. David Ashworth. We'd been married for 4 years when the accident happened. We met at a conference in Chicago. He was in commercial real estate. I was presenting a paper on forensic methodologies for asset concealment, which in retrospect is the kind of detail that should have told me something. He was charming and confident, and he laughed at things other people didn't find funny. And he made me feel, for the first time in a long time, like someone was paying attention, really paying attention. I was 31 when I married him. I knew, theoretically, that his family had money, the kind of money that has a history to it, that comes with expectations and structures and people whose job it is to protect it. I knew his father ran a real estate development firm and that his mother sat on the boards of several charities and that they had a house in Scottsdale they used in January and February. I knew all of this the way you know things you've been told without quite absorbing them, because the person you're in love with is standing right there making the rest of it feel peripheral. I should have absorbed it. 14 months before the accident, my husband had asked me to sign what he described as a financial planning document. We were restructuring some joint accounts, he said, consolidating. His family's attorney had drafted it to simplify things. It was a weekend. We'd had friends over for dinner the night before. I was tired and slightly hungover and feeling warm toward him in that particular post-gathering way. He set the document in front of me and handed me a pen and said it was routine. I signed it without reading it. I know. I know. I'm the person who reads footnotes. I am the person who has explained to corporate clients in detailed reports exactly how people get defrauded when they trust instead of verify. I am aware of the irony. I have sat with it. I have examined it from every angle. What I've come to understand is that the love bombing, the years of being made to feel uniquely seen and valued and chosen, had done something to my judgment that I didn't fully recognize until it was gone. He knew what he was doing. They all knew what he was doing. They all knew what they were doing. The document I signed was a post-nuptial agreement. I didn't know that's what it was until my mother helped me get my phone from my bag in the hospital room, and I called my friend Tessa, who is a tax attorney, and described what I'd heard. "Can you get me a copy of what you signed?" she asked. "I don't know what I signed," I said. "David told me it was." "I know what he told you," she said. "Can you get me a copy?" I couldn't, not from the hospital room. But Tessa knew how to get her hands on filed documents, and by the next morning, she'd found it. She called me back, and I made my mother step outside because I needed to hear it alone first before I let anyone else see my face. "Ren," she said carefully, "it's a postnup. And there's a clause in it, Section 4, Paragraph C, that essentially reclassifies any assets commingled after the date of signing as separate marital property to be distributed under the Ashworth Family Trust's guidelines, not under standard Arizona community property law." What does that mean in practice? It means that anything you deposited into joint accounts or used for shared expenses in the last 14 months, your salary, your savings contributions, the money from your grandmother's estate, they've structured it so it flows into a bucket they control. The room felt very still. "How much are we talking?" she told me. "I won't repeat the number because even now it makes me want to put my head down on a table. What I will say is that it was enough, more than enough, to explain the Phoenix account my father-in-law had mentioned. It was enough to explain why they'd needed to move the timeline. It was enough to explain the black SUV. I stayed in the hospital for more days. David visited twice. Both visits were brief and performed with the careful emotional register of someone who has rehearsed concern. He brought flowers the first time, a specific brand of sparkling water I liked the second time, and both times he asked how I was feeling in a way that made me understand he was not actually asking how I was feeling. He didn't touch me. He sat in the chair my mother usually occupied, and he looked at his phone more than he looked at me, and when he left, the room felt cleaner. My mother noticed. She didn't say anything. She just made tea from the little electric kettle she'd brought from home and handed me a cup, and we watched the news together, and I understood that we had both arrived at the same conclusion without having to say it out loud. I spent those 4 days making a list. It's what I do when things are bad. I make lists. I build structures. I look for the shape of the problem underneath the panic. By the time I was discharged, I had a clear picture of what I was dealing with, a post-nuptial agreement I'd been deceived into signing, joint accounts that had been strategically commingled to capture my assets, a transfer in progress, the Phoenix account, that represented the funds being moved before I could challenge anything, a car accident that two people had spoken about in the past tense using passive language in a hospital room while they thought I was unconscious, and a husband who had never once, in 4 days, looked frightened that he might have lost me. I also had Tessa, and I had my mother, and I had 14 years of professional experience untangling exactly this kind of financial architecture. What they had forgotten, what David had apparently forgotten or maybe never fully considered, was what I actually do for a living. Tessa connected me with a family law attorney named Rosario, who had the specific, contained energy of someone who has heard everything and is no longer surprised by any of it. She reviewed the post-nup and confirmed what Tessa had found. She also identified two things that mattered enormously. First, David had made a procedural error. Under Arizona law, a post-nuptial agreement requires independent legal counsel for both parties or an explicit documented waiver of that right. There was no such documentation in my file. He'd had me sign it during a casual weekend with no attorney present and no waiver on record. The agreement had a significant enforceability problem. Second, the financial transfers that had occurred in the 14 months since signing, the ones designed to capture my assets, had been structured in a way that my forensic accounting background allowed me to trace. Not just in our joint accounts, but through a series of LLC transfers within the Ashworth family trust that had been designed to look like standard real estate transactions. I had worked on corporate fraud cases that looked exactly like this. I had written the methodology for identifying exactly this kind of concealment. They had brought a knife to what they didn't know was going to be a gunfight. The next 6 weeks were the hardest of my life and also the most clarifying. I moved into my mother's house. She lives 20 minutes from our condo, and the distance felt right, and I went to work. Tessa and Rosario and I built the case piece by piece. We documented the procedural failure in the postnup. We traced the financial flows. We identified the Phoenix transfer. It had cleared the day after I was discharged from the hospital, but we found it and documented its origin. We compiled everything into a formal forensic report, the kind I'd written dozens of times for corporate litigation, with exhibits and footnotes and a clear chain of custody for every piece of evidence. I want to say something here about the postnup because I know it's the part of this story that makes people pause. I've read the comments on stories like mine. I know what people think. How could a smart woman sign something without reading it? What was she thinking? Here's what I was thinking. I was thinking that I was safe. I was thinking that the person handing me the pen loved me. I was thinking that we were partners, that our lives were genuinely intertwined, that no one who looked at me the way he looked at me could be running a play against me. I was thinking, on some level, that to read the document carefully would be to admit that I thought he might be deceiving me, and that admitting that thought would mean the whole structure of what I believed about my marriage might be unstable. Love makes you want to not look too closely at the things that might not be real. I understand that now in a way I didn't before. And I tell you this not to excuse it. It was a mistake. Full stop. but because I think it's important to be honest about how it happens. It doesn't happen to careless people. It happens to people who decided to believe in something. That decision is not a character flaw, it's a human thing. The people who exploit it are the ones with the character flaw. In the fourth week, I filed for divorce. David called me that evening. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was very long and covered a range of emotional registers, initially wounded, then explanatory, then briefly conciliatory, then when none of that seemed to be landing the way he wanted. Quietly threatening in the way that people are when they want to threaten you, but also want to be able to say later that they never threatened you. He referenced the postnup. He referenced how much I had to lose. He said he hoped I was thinking clearly. I deleted the voicemail. Then I called Rosario and told her he'd called. Good, she said. Any contact from him or his family, document it and send it to me. Don't engage. Let us do the talking. 3 days later, his parents' attorney sent a letter asserting the enforceability of the postnup. Rosario responded with our forensic report and a detailed motion regarding the procedural failure. 48 hours after that, they requested a meeting. The meeting happened in Rosario's conference room on a Thursday morning. I sat across from David and his parents and two attorneys I'd never seen before, and I looked at them clearly for the first time, without the overlay of affection or loyalty or hope that had softened everything before. My mother-in-law's expression was the thing I remember most. She'd been so certain for so long that she understood exactly what kind of person I was and exactly what I would and wouldn't do. The expression on her face that morning told me she was revising that assessment in real time and that she didn't like what she was finding. We settled outside of court. The terms are confidential, so I won't detail them here, except to say that the forensic report served its purpose. The Phoenix transfer was revoked. The postnup was voided. I walked away from my marriage with what was mine, including the portion of my savings and my grandmother's estate money that had been in transit toward their accounts. As for the accident, the black SUV, the intersection, the name Rodrigo, that was a separate matter and one I turned over entirely to the police. I gave them the transcript of what I'd heard in the hospital room. I gave them everything I had. What they did with it is their jurisdiction. I made myself stop needing to know the outcome, which was harder than anything else in this story, but I think the right decision. What I didn't expect in all of this was how the process would change me. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that makes for a tidy ending. I'm still in therapy. I still sometimes wake up at 3 in the morning and run through the timeline looking for the moments where I should have seen it sooner. I still have opinions about prenups and postnups and the importance of independent counsel that I will share at length if you give me an opening. But I also have my work, which I've always been good at, and I have my mother, and I have Tessa, who answers the phone on the second ring no matter what time it is. And I have the specific, quiet satisfaction of knowing that the thing they underestimated about me, my professional expertise, the very skill set they apparently forgot I had when they decided to run this play, was the exact thing that dismantled them. I went back to work 8 weeks after the accident. My first case back was a mid-size medical supply company being defrauded by a CFO who'd set up a shell structure through a series of Delaware LLCs. Standard architecture. I found it in 11 days. My supervisor asked afterward if I'd had any trouble getting back into it, whether the time off had disrupted my instincts. I told him it had sharpened them, actually. He seemed to find that mildly confusing. I didn't try to explain. Some things you only understand if you've had to untangle them yourself. If you've had to sit in a hospital room pretending to be unconscious while people who thought they'd already won made plans right in front of you. Some things only make sense from inside the wreckage. From inside the wreckage, you learn which parts of yourself were always load-bearing and which parts were just decorative. You learn who will drive to the hospital in gardening clothes without asking questions. You learn that the instincts you spent years developing don't disappear just because you fell in love with someone who was betting on them being dormant. They don't disappear. They were just waiting. I've thought a lot about what actually happened. Not the legal part, not the documents and depositions and conference room settlement, but the mechanism underneath it, the cause and the effect. Because there was a logic to all of it, and I think it's worth naming. David and his family built something they intended to be invisible. They spent years constructing it, the charm, the access, the carefully timed document on a lazy Sunday morning, the transfer quietly clearing while I was still in a hospital bed. They were meticulous. And what undid them in the end was not luck or circumstance, it was the direct consequence of their own choices, run through the one variable they hadn't bothered to account for: me. They forgot what I did for a living. Or maybe they didn't forget. Maybe they just decided it didn't matter. Because they'd already decided what kind of person I was. The kind who would sign without reading. The kind who could be managed. That decision, that particular arrogance, was the thing that cost them everything. You can't build a fraud on someone's trust and then be surprised when the person you defrauded knows how to find it. That's not fate. That's just math. What I keep coming back to, though, is the ethics of it. Not theirs, which were straightforward in their oddiness, but mine. The choices I made before I knew what was happening. I chose to trust when my instincts were sending quiet signals I didn't want to receive. I chose comfort over clarity. I told myself that reading the document would be an act of disloyalty, when really it would have been an act of intelligence. Those were my choices, and they had consequences, and I've had to sit with that honestly rather than let myself off the hook because I was the one who got hurt. Integrity isn't only about what you do when someone wrongs you. It's also about being honest about where you were complicit in your own circumstances, not to punish yourself, but to actually learn something. I made a mistake, a significant one, and understanding that, clearly and without flinching, was part of what allowed me to fix it. You can't correct a problem you're still pretending isn't yours. The resilience part. I hesitate to make it sound clean because it wasn't. Tessa answered the phone when I called from a hospital bed with a bruised rib and a head that still wasn't right. My mother sat in that room for 4 days and didn't once tell me what to feel. Rosario looked at my forensic report and said, "This is solid work," in a tone that felt at the time like someone handing me a rope. Resilience for me looked like accepting help. It looked like being willing to say out loud that something terrible had happened instead of managing the optics of it. What I want to say to anyone who recognizes something of themselves in this story is not be stronger. It's use what you already have. You built skills. You built relationships. You built a self that exists completely independently of whoever hurt you. The people who tried to take from Ren forgot that Ren had spent 14 years learning exactly how to find what was hidden. Whatever you've spent your years learning, that's still yours. It doesn't transfer with the assets. The account in Phoenix got reversed. The post-nup got voided. I went back to work and found fraud in 11 days because that's what I do. What they took, I got back. What I learned, I kept.